Okay, everybody. This is Module 2, Lecture 3, talking about a better way forward. Something key to keep in mind here, so we talked about before a little bit, and that's that what we consider to be the surge, the actual military operation in Iraq, was in reality essentially a secondary or supporting mission. The main effort, if you will, was maintaining the political will to continue back stateside in the United States among the politicians and the voters. So we've sort of covered this a little bit before, but in modern warfare, in situations like Iraq, like Afghanistan, where the security of the United States is not being threatened, at least directly. This seems to be becoming the norm. Ever since Vietnam, the U.S. has rarely been in danger of being defeated militarily, but the political will to continue fighting such conflicts is frequently in peril. So in a previous lecture, I talked about how the professionalism of the U.S. military and the American people's trust and confidence therein was, in a large part, what enabled the surge to succeed. Moreover, it seems likely that this approach to implementing controversial military policies, for example, putting a military face on a controversial civilian policy decision, this approach is likely to continue. And if such an approach has the potential to damage the civil-military relationship and the professionalism of the military, and make us less secure that way, it would seem necessary that we should find an alternative. So let's look at what's the internal situation is that's incentivizing this approach of putting a military face on decisions. So first of all, intuitively, let's just assume that civilian leaders trust the military's fidelity, but are not confident in the military's ability to wage modern warfare without close supervision. Let's further assume that voters have greater trust and confidence in the military's fidelity and abilities than in the fidelity and abilities of the civilian leadership. And then let's finally, thirdly, let's assume that in modern warfare, civilian leaders are not confident in the military's ability to understand political necessities, and at the same time, voters lack confidence in the civilian leadership's abilities to understand the military capabilities, and also just don't trust the civilian leadership's, fidelity to faithfully and honestly execute a strategy. So, all of this is incentivizing the civilian leaders to continue putting a military face on policy decisions, and I think all these assumptions we've come up with here are fairly uncontroversial. In effect, we just look at what the four issues are, that are causing this. First, we just have the fact that there is modern warfare and how it is, is involved. It involves sort of situations that aren't a direct threat to the U.S. and its security, so they're going to be a little bit more controversial in and of themselves, almost by definition. Second is the military's lack of understanding of political realities in modern warfare. That is, if the military is focusing on fighting, implementing a surge in Iraq, they really aren't going to be the duty experts in keeping the political, keeping abreast of political realities, public opinion polls in the U.S. and nor should they be. And that Peter Feaver gets into that a little bit about how it's not the job of military advisors to talk about what's going to be politically expedient or feasible. And three, there is the issue of the civilian leaders, to a large extent, not understanding the military capabilities in modern warfare. A good sort of example or vignette from this is the conversation between Madeleine Albright and Colin Powell back during the Clinton administration about whether to go and get involved in the Balkans, where Madeleine Albright famously said to Colin Powell, why do we spend so much money on this wonderful military if we can't even go ahead and use it? Which, some would argue is a fundamental misunderstanding of what the military is there for. But, in modern warfare, there's definitely some differing opinions on that. And the fourth issue, I think, is just as I mentioned before, the voters' lack of trust in civilian leaders. And as you saw on that chart I posted last week, the trust that voters have in civilian leaders has been declining significantly over the past few decades, while the trust in the military has been increasing. So let's talk about four potential solutions to these these issues. So the first one is just simply stop getting involved in irregular warfare, which is feasible theoretically, given that by definition these types of conflicts are not due to a direct threat. It's not that we're fighting for our homeland territory. There is a decision being made of whether or not to fight them. The second would be having a more politically savvy military that could understand these political realities and thereby perhaps the civilian leadership having greater confidence in the military to be able to wage warfare effectively in the modern era, with an eye toward political necessities back home. Third potential solution would be having civilian leaders who had a better understanding of just military capabilities and just competence in military issues overall. And the fourth potential solution would be having, civilian leaders, Congress and otherwise, who, commanded greater trust from the voters. That obviously is lacking, according to polls. So, the first of these four solutions, I would argue, seems fairly far-fetched, just given that civilian leaders have demonstrated a preference for involvement in modern warfare contingencies, regardless of political affiliation and regardless of their, frankly, when it comes to the executive branch, regardless of their positions on such matters prior to assuming office. So, what we have tended to see in recent decades has been, presidential candidates coming in with, sort of promising not to go abroad in search of monsters to destroy, and then once being in office, having with the sort of problems stack up, not really wanting to sit there and do nothing, and so committing American troops to getting involved. That seems to be a pattern, again, regardless of party, and so I think it's the chances that the U.S. stops getting involved in these types of conflicts is a low probability. Let's put it that way. A second option could be to require military leaders to become more politically savvy, and savvy enough to understand the domestic political implications of military actions. Now, the issue is that this would involve in some way politicizing the military, and that's a problem for a number of reasons I'll get to in a sec. But nevertheless, the military is currently already politicizing itself in several small ways. There's the higher education, in political issues. There's tours of duty as congressional fellows on Capitol Hill. Extensive media training for leaders. The military is, to a certain degree, preparing its leaders politically as well as militarily. However, it's obviously unlikely that just that, or even a greater amount of training, would ever get our military leaders to have a political ability that's commensurate with civilian leaders. It's possible, but probably not quite as likely. And beyond that, I think more importantly, whether or not that's true, that the negative consequences of a politicized military are obvious and very significant, and that should be of great concern. We don't want to politicize the military itself. So we have these other options. The third option would be for civilian leaders to try to create, the perception that they're, competent and trustworthy enough to wage modern warfare. And one way that voters' perceptions of civilian leaders' fidelity and ability might increase simultaneously would be if civilian defense officials with greater levels of military experience were elected. Studies have shown. Actually, this is another Peter Feber study that he did a while ago, which he looked at the number of the proportion of veterans in the executive and legislative branches, and found out that when there are more veterans in those positions, then there's a lower probability of initiating a conflict. However, at the same time, once a conflict began, the proportion of veterans in the executive and legislative branches correlated with, was positively correlated with the level of force authorized. In other words, the more veterans there were there, the higher, they're going to go in there and go hard. They were going to go in it to win it, if you will. So, furthermore, assuming that voters' high regard for military's fidelity and abilities in military matters would, at least somewhat transfer to veterans serving in civilian defense roles, this would likely give the civilian leaders a little more credibility to wage modern warfare. And moreover, if you look at the graph I posted last week, you'll see the esteem that in which the military is held compared with Congress, and it would seem likely to me that taking some of the folks from the most trusted institution and putting them into the least trusted institution couldn't help but increase voters' trust and confidence in their elected representatives. Probably all saw this coming, but that just so happens to be the mission of this entire program. So thanks for being part of it.